Hoon Kim is the assignment editor and senior correspondent for East and South Asia, as well as the managing editor at Global Strat View. He recently wrote a deeply personal tribute to his close friends, Tibetan activist Lobga Rangzen, also known as Lobsang Palden, reflecting on the years of friendship, Lobga's long life advocating for Tibet, and the values of freedom, human dignity that shaped his life. Kim, thank you for coming on the Bridge Conversation show. And I know he has been such a long friend, and I can feel everyone's what they were going through. So, can you start out with how you received the news and how you feel now?
Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me on your show. I think to get right onto it, you know, I received the news like probably 90% of the people here in New York City by through via Facebook and Instagram. I'm friends with Lobga on Facebook, and you know, I just saw that he posted something, and along with the personal message, and so and at first I just thought, okay, just another message or live streaming that Lobga and his other activist circles do very very often, and so I dismissed it as that at the moment. But when I found out what had happened, that's when it hit me. Okay, this is something different, and so I began to call other people. I began to call his friends. I began to call anyone that knew him to see what happened. And the first word that I received was that he's in the emergency room. And so I was in New Jersey at the time, actually. And so I rushed towards the hospital that he was staying at. And I remember just getting there, and Tibetans from different parts of New York were all trickling in. And the moment I got into the gate, a lady came up to me and said, "Lobga has passed away." And so that's how I found out his demise and what happened, what had transpired 2 days ago.
So, you wrote an article and you described Lobga as your brother. How did your friendships begin and how did it evolve over the past 12 years?
Well, like many friendships that I have with the Tibetan community, it started meeting people in rallies. I mean, back in 2014, when I was still a fresh college student, um, I remember it was in the summertime, and there was a demonstration in front of the UN, actually, by I guess some of the independent Tibetan protesters, and Lobga was one of them, and he was actually one of the first people that I had the opportunity to meet and to engage on the Tibetan issue. Now again, just as a disclaimer, I've known members of the Tibetan community since I think officially in 2013, but I began a little more active, be a little more active in 2014, and that's where I met folks like Lobga, and that's where our friendship started. And I think the reason why I call him a brother is because he had the tendency to inspire other people without really even saying anything, without trying to convince anybody, and that was through his actions. Um, Namely, he would always go outside to rally, to protest, and to even just talk to people about Tibet, rain or sleet. And I remember back around that time, he did a walk, a long walk from New York to I guess somewhere else, carrying the Tibetan flag, which I think he has done before as well. So. and afterwards. And so that's I guess that's the start of my relationship with Lobga. And so from then we've worked together on so many different things, and you know, it was it was a lot that transpired, and as you can imagine, I'm still in the grieving process, and it's really extremely hard to believe that something like this has happened.
Okay. The article you wrote titled Until Tibetan, let me just pull up the exact title of the article. Uh, what I realized, this article is both personal and journalistic. So what was the most difficult part of writing it so soon after his death? So you wrote it within days after his passing.
Well, I guess the hardest part is accepting the fact that he's gone. You know, Lobga was somebody that I've always expected to see around at any point when I visited Jackson Heights, Queens. Right, he would, and 80% of the times he would be wearing something Tibetan, right, if not all the time. And it was very normal for me to see him, you know, even just sitting in a restaurant where he'll just come inside, say hello, or to talk to people and say, "Hey Kim, how are you?" and just, you know, go on his way. And the fact that I won't be able to have that anymore, um, that I think is probably the worst thing to accept. And really, you know, the fact that I won't be able to see him in any of the major Tibetan rallies or events is something that I can't come to accept just yet. But also, as I've written in the article, Lobga's legacy, Lobga's ongoing work is something that I felt needed to be highlighted, which was the fact that he always, and I am, when I say always, I mean always, called for a complete freedom and independence of the Tibetan people, of the Tibetan nation, from the hands of the Chinese government. And I know that due to the internal, some what's known as some internal strife or internal discussions or viewpoints, he couldn't get his voice amplified at times, and that included you know, activities where I feel like he couldn't get his voice as you know, as on the top stage as I believe it deserved. And I just felt that it was important for people to realize that he was not just a brother, not only to me, but to all of the Tibetan community, but also that the man has given his life to amplify this message. And let me also add in the fact that, you know, as you've seen in the article, is that as a non-Tibetan, one of the biggest lessons that Lobga has given me, and to many others who've known Lobga for over the years, was the following message: is that yes, Tibetan issue is important. I want you to care about my people and what has happened to my people, but also you have to take into account that you must be appreciative of the freedoms that you have, and you must be careful that none of the stuff that we've experienced as Tibetans ever come into your shores. And that, I believe, was his warning to all of us about the dangers of communism, the dangers of a totalitarian state, um, and he always successfully used the Tibetan issue to educate us on that. And whether he realized it or not, you know, it was a great lesson for all of us.
Yes.
And the beauty about that is that the man he didn't really have to say anything. He always showed through his actions.
Your article also emphasized his kindness and humility. So, what are some of the memories that best capture who he was outside of the public demonstrations and advocacy?
Well, there's a lot. There's so many to be named. I guess one of the most memorable things was whenever we had events or demonstrations or anything, he'd always offer to give rides, right, to people, not and especially on a hot day or on a day where there's a lot of snow. I mean, that was sort of like a Hail Mary moment for a lot of us. But the other thing would be is that, I mean, personally for me, I also appreciated our long phone conversations, and sometimes he would just meet with me to just talk about his personal life, his you know what he would like to do in the future. I remember directly that he said, "Look, when we go back to Tibet, when Tibet is finally free, the first thing that we're gonna do is you're gonna come to my village. I'm gonna show you around, and if you ever want to live there, you can come live with me." I mean, that's probably one of the most memorable things about my time with Lobga. And plus, but on a greater scale, I really, what really comes into mind is Lobga's um, Lobga's unwavering support to those who genuinely wanted to support Tibet. And I mean for people like myself, right, outsiders. He made sure that we always had our materials, but also back in actually in 2015 when I organized a Tibetan festival back in my university, Lobga was always there. Lobga came and helped along with his other Tibetan colleagues at the time. They helped organize a dancing troupe, and I brought them up all the way to University of Rochester, where I was attending school at the time, and they showcased Tibetan culture. And I remember him telling me, this is what we have to do, to tell people who we are and what we need to do. And so, to answer your question, there's just too many to count, but one thing for sure is that he's probably one of the kindest people I've ever met in my entire life.
You also wrote that you noticed a deeper urgency in his voice in recent months.
Yeah.
So looking back, what do you think was weighing most heavily on him at the time?
This is gonna sound a bit critical. It might be hard for certain people to hear, but I guess it was a number of things. Among some of the biggest things was disunity among the Tibetan community. There's and again, there is this clear line, right, where people feel like they can't cross, which is the fact that, okay, well, I want complete freedom, right? But there's this policy that says, hey, we need to try to work with China and to live under their context, which I think was created to try to realistically work it out, right, with the situation at hand. But Lobga, again, it's I don't need to tell you or any other Tibetan that he was a very outspoken person. Because of his outspokenness, there were times where folks just didn't want to connect with him, right? Folks just didn't want to do anything with him, right? But now that he is gone, and here's the thing, what surprised me the most is that I saw folks that would have been otherwise against him or criticized him heavily, and I know that for sure. I'm coming out with candles and and saying justice for Lobsang Palden. Now, what that told me was that at the end of the day, no matter what the official policy is, inside every single Tibetan is the will and this desire to see a free Tibet, a completely free Tibet. And that's what everyone wants. And probably on a greater context, everyone knows that that this problem of communism needs to be addressed, right? Without without anything being filtered. I mean, let's be honest here. Is that Lobga's message right before he committed self-immolation was that there's disunity, and that all of these problems that we're facing is because of the current repression by the Chinese government.
Yeah.
And
So
what we need is a complete independence, right? And I don't know if that became a little too hard to accept for people, but at the end, he wanted people to realize that that was the reality.
mhm. So he committed self-immolation one day after China implemented what is known as the ethnic law, ethnic unity and progressive law. So why did Loga see it such a critical turning point?
Well, the ethnic unity law, it's it's something that's viewed by many critics, and it is what it is that it will eventually erode and erase the Tibetan identity, right? The Chinese government have, and again, this is one thing about communist governments, is that they have a tendency to put beautiful words over repressive policies. And when you say ethnic unity law, it means that they're trying to control people that looks differently than they do, and to second, to basically what I call Hanize the entire nation to a point where your original language, your original identity, it just becomes secondary, right? That you feel necessary to give all that up for the sake of the country, the unity of the country, as they call it. And so I think he felt that this was one of the death nails in the coffins, and I believe that Lobga, this is probably one of the biggest things that made Lobga lose. Um, Not well, okay. Well, I shouldn't say lose, but it made him feel a lot more sad and desperate at the same time.
I would like to show a clip here. This clip I'm showing is from New York. And is this the exact sport where he self-immolated and now they're allowed to put up his pictures and people are coming there and even prostrating at the site? So can you explain about the sites that I am showing here on the screen?
Yeah, so that was the exact site where the self-immolation occurred. As you can see, they've put a kata around the place where Loka's remains were located. I remember going there a few hours after it happened, and I was actually one of the first people, along with a few of my other Tibetan friends, to help pick up some of his burnt remains into a bag. And so I unfortunately after that I hadn't had the opportunity to go there, but as you can see, people have already built a memorial in his honor.
And so this will be allowed. It will be there for how long?
I have no idea. I'm sure it's going to be there for at least a few days. I wouldn't be surprised if it's there for more than a week at this point. But I also do believe that it will be some type of memorial will always remain in that place for some time.
So your article, as I read it carefully, avoids glorifying self-immolation while also explaining its significance. So, how can people understand these acts within the broader context of Tibetan resistance without romanticizing them?
Okay, so look, ending one's life is never the way to go. Okay, and that's my firm belief. But also for those who don't understand self-immolation, I mean, this is one of the things that made it's just so inspiring, for me as an outsider, is that although the act itself is never condonable, is that it shows two very significant things, is that Tibetans would rather harm themselves rather than harm others, right? This is very consistent with the Dalai Lama's what we view as the Dalai Lama's in um, you know, nonviolent action, but also at the same time, although he never condones self-immolation, by the way, for those of you watching. And then secondly, it just shows what every Tibetan is feeling inside day by day as the Chinese repression on the Tibetan people continues. And this is what they've been feeling for decades, since the invasion of the CCP into Tibet, taking everything over and doing what they've been doing. And so, you know, and for Americans, this is a shocking moment to us all, because this is the first recorded self-immolation to have occurred in the United States, let alone being right in front of the United Nations headquarters. And so, no matter what, I think people should focus on the message behind it, while, on a personal level, we constantly need to keep each other in check up on each other, make sure everyone's okay. I remember, I say this because folks been telling me is that, I've talked to Lobga this morning. I thought things were fine, but he did say one thing that was a little weird. And so, look, as much as it does send a powerful message, it's better to live on another day by day, carrying on the fight together. And if I can go back in time and have this conversation with Lobga, I'll say, brother, I will stand with you. You don't have to do this. And I'm sure I speak on behalf of so many other people who knew Lobga for a time that I didn't, or even longer.
Also, based on your article, Lobga believed that the struggles for Tibetans, Uyghurs, and Hong Kongs and Southern Mongolians were all interconnected.
Correct.
And here, at the same time, I would like to show you the outpouring solidarities among Tibetans. People started posting on Facebook, social media, taking to the streets, protesting in front of the Chinese embassies, and so on. And then on Monday, tomorrow, there will be the funerals in New York, and you said you are going to attend it. And why you think that is important for you?
Well, look, we're approaching a thing called the Captive Nations Week, which is located in the month of July, and that actually has been recognized by the U.S. government. The Captive Nations Week is to essentially honor those who are under repressive governments, and definitely all those communities that you've mentioned, namely the Southern Mongolians, East Turkestan, Tibet, all nations under occupation by the Chinese government are one of them, right? And Lobga, one thing about Lobga that I remember is that every time we would organize an event or a meeting, or be it at New York, Washington, D.C., or wherever, he would say, hey, do you think we can call our friends from the Uyghur community or the Hong Kong community? Or do you think our friends from the Southern Mongolian, community can join? He would always ask me that, right? But I believe that he asked me that because he knew the importance of unity and sending out the same message with diversity, with natural diversity behind us, of the dangers that this could pose to the free peoples here in the United States, right? And to the rest of the world. And I guess, to me, that was his personal service, right, to all of us, at least here in the United States. Continuously warning us, continuously trying to educate us on the dangers of this totalitarian ideology, right? And what has transpired in places like Tibet, right? And then constantly ensuring that, and hopefully ensuring that this would somehow impact policy here as well. So to answer your question, yeah, that there's a huge number of significance on that regard, and I think Lobga, I mean, Lobga was one of the most persistent people to amplify this message at all times. And I think I should just leave it at that.
Yeah. So here I'm putting a poem written by a Tibetan in Switzerland, Tashi Gele.
Hmm.
And this really captures the sense or the emotions, what all Tibetans are going through at the moment. So I won't be able to read the entire this poem. I will just post it on my the bridge conversation. But just let me read just few lines here. A
Sure.
flame for freedom in memory of Lobga Rangzen. My mind is frozen and my senses are numb. His last words still echo in my ears, and his last image is forever engraved in my memory. With a trembling voice and eyes full of tears, I pay my deepest homage to one of the bravest heroes of Tibet, Lobga Rangzen. Even in his final moments, there was no fear in his eyes, no anger in his demeanor, only a voice steady with renewed hope and a spirit that no flame could crush. His body might have perished, but his determination burned brighter than the flames that consumed him. If you are not familiar with Tibetan struggle for freedom and his act seems extreme to you, I ask for only 1 minute of your time and heed. How much pain must a human being endure prior to choosing to alight himself? How desperate must one become believe one must become believing before believing that sacrificing one's own life is the only options available to make the world listen. For decades, Tibetan cried out for justice, yet our voices have too often been met with silence. If the world fails Tibet, it doesn't merely fail one nation, it fails the very principles of peace, justice, and compassion, period. So, this is the first page of the poem, and I will post the second page there. And so, one final thoughts from you. I know you are a journalist, as you are also a very close friends of Lobga Rangzen. So, how do you balance your emotional? What should I say? Emotional these things, uh, storytelling with journalistic responsibility when coverage issue like Tibet and human rights.
Well, look, as a journalist, right? It's my job to put things as they are, and since you've mentioned, the journalistic portion, and I think I've shared, a lot about my personal connection to Lobga. I will also say this is that what helped me to keep this line is to, and being on channels like yours, is to say the following, which I think Lobga probably also would have wanted, is that there needs to be an equal amount of space for all voices within the Tibetan community. Notice how he never went by the name Lobsang Palden. He always went by the name Lobga Rangzen, meaning that he wanted people to understand that he stood on the line of Rangzen, which is independence. And objectively looking at it, that unfairly a lot of times was a grounds for ostracization, a lot of gossiping, and a lot of I would say swaying away by those who thought otherwise. And I and I personally believe that that was the other biggest frustrations for Lobga. And really, to be fair, that's the frustration with so many of those who want to speak outright about Rangzen. But I guess sometimes, a lot of some people within the organizational sphere feel that, oh, you have to be diplomatic, you have to work it out. Well, sure, there's a space for that too, but that shouldn't result in ostracization of somebody who genuinely believe that Tibet should be independent or free. And by the way, let me also say this, is that I've been covering China for a long time, and you have a government for sure is that has a zero record of keeping its promises. unless it's for their interest. And their interest right now is to ensure that Tibet, East Turkestan, Southern Mongolia, Hong Kong, you name it, any of these occupied territories by the CCP remains part of CCP, even greater than remaining part of China, for example, right? And just seeing that portion, and it's enough for somebody within the Tibetan community to say, well, look, I don't trust that. I think it's rather better for us to be completely free. And I think every Tibetan realizes that, and I think every Tibetan to a certain extent agrees with that. And so because that is the case, maybe this is a stark reminder that we need to have an equal space for discussion and viewpoints to be represented here during this in this thing called the Tibetan struggle, right? Because it is a struggle, and I always will tell Tibetans is that, look, you can't afford to be divided at this point. More Tibetans are going to die within Tibet. More Tibetans are going to go through these policies, right, where they would lose their identity. And I'll give you an example is that when you go to Manchuria, the former Manchuria or Northeast China at this point, you have what you call the Korean descendants, right? There's Korean ethnic groups up there. When some of them come over to the United States, an interesting happened is that at least 10, 15 years ago, I find a lot of them being able to speak Korean. But if you talk to any of them that are coming in the recent times, majority of them can't even speak a word in Korean. Maybe they understand a few things, and because of K-pop, maybe, but they rather identify as with their Han identity, right? Even though they're fully Korean, than with their Korean identity. And I thought, maybe this is something that the Chinese government is trying to do. And this is devastating, right? The Panchen Lama is still missing, right? The real Panchen Lama. Government can't go back to Tibet, right? And as he has all the right to, but he can't. But while all this is going on, we have this toxic division within the Tibetan community that I personally see, that I think China is really profiting off of. Right? They're just and the most unfortunate thing here, Damdula, that I see is that they're just sitting back and watching, and that is sad. And so, for anyone, and you read a really beautiful poem there. You're right. And every word of that poem is absolutely, it touches upon the heart of all Tibetans and Tibet supporters. But one thing to remember is that although there is an official policy, we must also never forget the real passion, the real, I guess, the will of the Tibetan people. And look, let me just call things out as it is that even the media, the Tibetan media, I don't think has done a great job in amplifying that. And maybe, if anything, instead of maybe criticizing and fighting over it, maybe it's time for us to really just come together in one table and try to have a dialogue among ourselves. Because look, the other thing that I'm wondering is that how do you have a dialogue with the Chinese when we can't even have dialogue among ourselves, right? And so that's probably one of the things that needs to be done. And plus, look, I come as an outsider. Maybe you can make the argument that, hey, this is not the way that we do it. That this is, we'll handle it upon our own. Fine. But remember, is that while you're figuring all that out, people in Tibet are still suffering. And for outsiders like myself, when Tibet fails, and if Tibet fails, God forbid, right? Not when, if Tibet fails, this will be one of the biggest success stories of any totalitarian government. They will point out to Tibet in the future and say, look, you guys let it happen. And not only was it our victory, you made sure that we were doing the right thing. And here's the thing, I refuse to let that happen. I'm sure a lot of people will stand with me on that. And so I think to really honor the man's memory, I think to really honor the man's message, that's what we need to do. We need to truly come together, work together, let things that has happened flow, right? Like water under the bridge. and to really come together as Tibetans. And the beautiful thing is that you have a very beautiful Tibetan flag to stand under. And maybe that could be the first thing that helps unite all Tibetans, along with Gyalro Rinpoche, along with so many others who has dedicated their lives to the Tibetan people.
Yeah. And July 6th is also His Holiness the Dalai Lama's birthday.
Sure.
And in his final testimony, Lobga Rangzen urged every Tibetans to celebrate it in a grander scale. And
Right.
he's extremely respectful and faithful to His Holiness the Dalai Lama for bestowing democratic systems to exile Tibetan people and urging every Tibetans to take make good use of the systems to advance our freedom and struggles. So I would like to end it here with your beautiful final perspective. And you will also promise to keep telling the world about Tibet. And so I really appreciate for coming on our show. Do you have any final thoughts on this?
Well, you mentioned Gyalro Rinpoche's birthday, right?
Yes.
I think firstly, if we were to unite on anything, we should be united in celebrating his birthday. It should be uniting also on the tireless work that Gyalro Rinpoche has given to the world. And here's the thing: I say this as a Christian. Okay, this doesn't only pertain to Buddhists,
Mhm.
but his work, his dedication to his people, and everything that is done is something that is again, it could be and has to be a grounds for all Tibetans to unite and its supporters to unite for an eventual free Tibet time. So I'd like to wish Gyalro Rinpoche a happy birthday, and I also pray that he remains healthy and for a long life, and continue to inspire us for many generations to come.
Thank you. His Holiness is right now in Ladakh. Well, his 91st birthday will be officially celebrated in Ladakh, where thousands of devotees are converged. So again, thank you so much, C. Hoon Kim. He is the managing editors of at Global Strat View and a very close friends of Lobga Rangzen. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your perspectives.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.